I'm about to show you something that may completely change what you do before going to bed tonight. It involves a rule that millions of seniors follow every night simply because a doctor once recommended it. It also involves what that rule may be doing to the blood during sleep, and why the hours between 2 and 6 in the morning represent the most dangerous cardiovascular window of the entire day. There is a strong possibility that a habit meant to protect sleep is quietly creating a dangerous condition inside the bloodstream every single night. Most seniors never connect the two, most physicians never fully explain it, yet the mechanism is precise. It develops hour by hour in a clear sequence. By the end of this video, you will understand what evening dehydration can do to the blood, why 4 a.m. is often when the risk peaks, and the specific approach that can keep blood moving safely during that window without forcing you to wake up at 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. This is not about simply drinking more water. It is about understanding what happens to the blood when fluid intake stops. Stay with me, because the explanation begins with a man named Thomas. What happened to him on a Thursday morning in February is the reason this video exists. Thomas was 76 years old. He lived outside Nashville, Tennessee. He was a disciplined man who believed in doing things correctly. His military background influenced nearly everything in his life. After 30 years of service, he was not someone who approached things halfway. For 11 years, he had followed a rule: no water after 6 in the evening. His urologist had recommended restricting evening fluids to reduce nighttime bathroom trips that disrupted sleep. Thomas followed the advice carefully. In fact, he stopped drinking at 5:30, even earlier than instructed, believing that if a rule was worth following, it should be followed precisely. He slept well, 6 hours, sometimes 7, without waking. His wife Margaret considered this one of his personal achievements. Margaret, however, had noticed a few things she never mentioned to him. On the nights he did wake and walk to the bathroom, he moved slowly with one hand along the wall. The careful shuffle suggested someone who had learned that moving too quickly in the dark might cause the room to spin. She had also noticed that each morning he sat on the edge of the bed for a moment before standing, as if gathering his balance. She asked about it once early on. He dismissed it as simple aging. Since Thomas was not a man who complained, she trusted his judgment. Still, Margaret sensed something else. He seemed depleted when he woke up, in a way that sleep did not seem to correct. Not ordinary fatigue for a man in his 70s, but something heavier. She once described it to their daughter as depleted, as if he began each day already behind. Thomas himself had stopped seeing these signs as symptoms. He simply adapted. He placed a small lamp near the bathroom for nighttime trips. He avoided scheduling early morning commitments because the first 2 hours of his day required more effort than they once had. He was compensating for a problem he did not know existed. His annual physical showed nothing unusual. His metabolic panel, lipid panel, kidney function, and other tests all appeared normal. His doctor told him he was in excellent health for his age. The chart was accurate about everything it measured. What it did not measure was anything happening between 5:30 in the evening and 6 GON the following morning. Thomas also had mild cardiovascular disease. 4 years earlier, imaging had revealed a coronary artery with approximately 30% stenosis. His cardiologist explained that the plaque was not significantly blocking blood flow. With his current medications, there was no urgent concern. The plan was simple: annual imaging and continue his routine. After Thomas died, his cardiologist reviewed the case. The plaque itself had been stable for 4 years. What triggered the event was not the plaque alone, but the surge of adrenaline that occurred when Thomas stood up while severely dehydrated. The resulting arterial spasm occurred in a coronary vessel that had been carrying progressively thicker blood throughout the night. His body had been losing blood volume since 5:30 the evening before. Under that sudden stress, the edge of the plaque fractured. A clot formed within seconds. Thomas did not survive getting out of bed. He did not die because his heart was failing. He died after 11 years of disciplined adherence to a rule that no one had explained could create this risk. Margaret had quietly adapted to his routine. After 47 years of marriage, she understood the difference between Thomas's preferences and his principles. The no water rule had become a principle. She stopped offering him water after dinner. His glass remained empty from 5:30 in the evening until morning. He woke every day between 5:45 and 6 HA, a habit so consistent he had not needed an alarm clock since 1987. Each morning, he swung his legs out of bed with the efficiency of someone who had repeated the same motion thousands of times. He would sit briefly, perhaps 3 seconds, before standing, not the 30 seconds that might have mattered. Margaret would usually find him in the kitchen soon afterward. On that Thursday morning, she found him on the floor. To understand why Thomas did not survive, it is necessary to look at what happens to the blood overnight. The mechanism develops in a predictable sequence. The first point to understand is that dehydration does not stop when a person falls asleep. The body continues losing water through a process called insensible fluid loss. moisture leaving the body through breathing, and the skin without triggering thirst or awareness. Each night, a resting adult typically loses between 1 and 2 pounds of water weight in this way, not through sweating or urination, but through breathing and passive skin evaporation while lying still. For a senior who goes to bed fully hydrated, this loss is manageable. For someone who stopped drinking hours earlier, the situation is different. If a person stops drinking at 5:30 and goes to bed at 10 a.m., the body already experiences 4.5 hours of fluid loss before sleep even begins. Plasma volume begins declining. Red blood cells become more concentrated relative to the surrounding fluid. Then the overnight fluid loss continues for 6 to 8 hours. Water continues leaving the bloodstream. The result is hemoconcentration. Hematocrit, the proportion of red blood cells relative to fluid, rises. The critical point is that the relationship between fluid concentration and blood viscosity is not linear, it is exponential. Blood does not gradually thicken during dehydration. Once a threshold is crossed, the change can become dramatic. If hematocrit rises from around 42% to roughly 52% overnight, the blood does not become slightly thicker. It begins behaving like a dense suspension that requires significantly greater force from the heart to push through small vessels. Consider the coronary arteries that supply blood to the heart muscle. In their smaller branches, they may measure only about 2 millimeters in diameter. Flow resistance through a tube increases dramatically as diameter decreases. Even a small reduction in effective diameter can produce a large increase in resistance. When blood thickens overnight, the heart must push harder to move it through vessels that may already be slightly narrowed by plaque. The heart muscle downstream receives less oxygen. A heart that should be resting is forced to work against thicker blood. That is only the first mechanism. Before moving to the next one, it is important to say something directly to anyone who has followed the no water after 6 rule for years. That advice was usually given with good intentions. This explanation simply reveals the other side of the equation, information that is rarely discussed during routine clinic visits. Now, consider the second mechanism. This one becomes dangerous largely because of its timing. The body contains enzymes called plasminogen activators that dissolve blood clots as they form. This protective system runs continuously, but the body also produces a protein called plasminogen activator inhibitor 1, often abbreviated PAI-1. Its role is to temporarily slow down that clot-dissolving system. PAI-1 follows a circadian rhythm. Its levels surge between approximately 4 Raus AM and 6 Naus AM just before waking. This pattern likely evolved as protection. As the body prepares for morning activity, it primes the clotting system so that minor injuries during movement can seal quickly. However, in a dehydrated senior, the situation may reverse. At 4 a.m., after many hours of fluid loss, the blood is already at its thickest point of the night. At that same moment, the body suppresses its clot-dissolving system. The blood becomes thicker, while the natural clot removal system is temporarily reduced. Any clot forming in a narrowed vessel is less likely to dissolve quickly. Large cardiovascular registries from multiple countries have observed the same pattern. Fatal heart attacks and ischemic strokes often peak in the early morning hours, particularly between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. This pattern does not occur because the heart is inherently weaker at 4 a.m. It occurs because several biological processes converge at the same time: thicker blood, suppressed clot breakdown, and the physiological transition from sleep to wakefulness. Researchers have studied these patterns for decades. The findings appear consistently across many datasets, yet the details rarely enter the short medical appointments where most seniors receive routine advice. For a senior lying asleep during this window, the question becomes whether they know that their blood may be at its thickest while clot-dissolving activity is temporarily reduced. Understanding why this occurs and how dehydration may amplify it changes how the risk should be evaluated. The PAI-1 surge is often stronger in people with insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, or metabolic stress, conditions common in older adults with cardiovascular disease. In a healthy 30-year-old, the surge may be modest, and the clot-dissolving system quickly recovers. In a 76-year-old who stopped drinking water hours earlier, the surge may occur while the blood has been thickening throughout the night. To see the full picture, imagine how these mechanisms stack together over a single night. A senior stops drinking at 5:30 in the evening and goes to bed at 10 p.m. During the next 4.5 hours before sleep, and then during 6 to 8 hours of sleep, insensible fluid loss steadily removes water from the bloodstream. By around 2 a.m., hematocrit has risen and the blood has thickened. The heart must work harder to move it. At the same time, protective layers lining the arteries may become slightly dehydrated and less effective at preventing platelet adhesion. Slow heart rates during deep sleep allow thicker blood to move more slowly through certain chambers of the heart. By around 4 a.m., PAI-1 levels rise and the clot-dissolving system becomes temporarily suppressed. The blood is thickest. The body's clot removal system is reduced. A few hours later, the person wakes and stands up. The sudden shift in blood pressure triggers a surge of adrenaline and noradrenaline. Coronary arteries may briefly constrict. In someone with existing plaque, even if that plaque has been stable for years, the mechanical stress can sometimes cause it to rupture. Once the plaque ruptures, a clot forms rapidly. If clot dissolution is suppressed, the vessel can block within seconds. Thomas survived the 4 a.m. window that morning. His body had enough reserve to maintain blood flow during sleep. What ultimately triggered the event was standing up. Understanding these mechanisms does not mean that every senior who avoids water after dinner faces the same outcome, but it shows how multiple biological factors, dehydration, circadian rhythms, and cardiovascular stress, can interact in ways that are rarely discussed together. And once those mechanisms are understood, the conversation about nighttime hydration and cardiovascular protection becomes very different.